Star Trek: The Final Frontier.
Yeah.
And where they go in search of God. And everyone who worked on the movie, Nimoy, everybody else said, don't blame Shatner. It was a good idea. He did a great job directing, but the script wasn't that strong. It was the weakest of all the scripts for the movies, and the budget had been cut. So there you go again, Paramount. They chopped the budget way down. So he had less money than the previous movies had had, a shorter shooting schedule, a script that was problematic, and so it just didn't work out as well as the other ones. I've only seen it once. I'll have to watch it again, but I remember I didn't think it was as up to par with the others, and so he got the blame. The same thing happened with the first one that came out in '79. It went way over budget, $45 million, which was an immense amount of money back then. And Roddenberry got the blame, and so they took Star Trek away from him and they handed it over to Harve Bennett to produce the rest of the movies, and Gene just served as a consultant. So they took his child away from him. And the tragic thing is, as I found out doing all my research and all the memos and everything that are in these new books now, is that the reason the budget was so high is because it was the series. They bought all these scripts. They were going to do a series. Then Paramount changed their mind, but they took all that money that was spent and tagged it on to the budget of the motion picture. And then Paramount hired a special effects house that they gave $5 million to and didn't get one usable frame of film, so then they had to hire another one. That got tagged onto the budget. And then Robert Weiss came in and said, tear down the sets, change all the costumes, it looks too much like the series, let's start from scratch. And so that got tagged onto the budget. So by the time it was all done, it was a very expensive movie, and none of it was Roddenberry's doing, but he was the producer, so he took the fall.
Oh, wow. See, I didn't even realize that. And that took if I remember right, that was one of them. It didn't really make any money.
No. At first time, you've been wrong.
Uh-oh.
It made a ton of money.
Okay.
It was the second biggest box office movie of the year, and I can't remember what the first one was. It's in the book, but I can't think offhand. But it was a big movie. May have been the second Star Wars movie, and but the reviews were mixed because it really was a script that was meant to be a 2-hour TV movie to launch the new series, and it would have been great on the small screen. But they put it on the big screen and then loaded it up with all these special effects, which kind of weighed it down, and it just didn't feel important enough or good enough, especially we were all coming off of the roller coaster ride of just watching Star Wars, and Indiana Jones and everything. So this one felt kind of plodding and slow in comparison. But really, they were trying to do something along the lines of 2001, which was slow and plodding. They were trying to do intellectual science fiction, and it didn't come out as well as they'd wanted as far as the reviews were concerned, even though it made a ton of money. So then they did Wrath of Khan as the second one, and they went back to action-adventure, and the audiences loved it, and they said, this is the way we're going to go from this point out.
Well, yeah, but, you have to admit the second one had some great actors in it.
Sure. I mean, it was very much Star Trek because they took that episode Space Seed with Ricardo Montalban and they did a sequel to it. And so it felt very much, Star Trek was action-adventure. NBC wanted it fast-paced. They wanted the fights. They wanted all that stuff in there. And where Star Trek the Motion Picture is more along the tone of Star Trek The Next Generation. It's more kind of a little more dialogue-heavy, more intellectual science fiction. But that's what Roddenberry wanted to do. That's what Paramount wanted to do. That's what Robert Weiss wanted to do. They were all saying, let's do 2001 as a Star Trek. And I happen to think it's pretty good. I like Star Trek the Motion Picture. The music is incredible. The story is very interesting. And here, do you remember the story of that one?
Vaguely. I've seen them all. I start seeing them, but Yeah,
that's the one with V'ger. And V'ger is Voyager. And so Voyager had just been sent out that year by NASA. and it was going to be the first space probe to go beyond our solar system, and it was the one that they put in the drawings of man and woman, and they put in a Chuck Berry record, and they put in all this stuff as kind of a how do you do from the human race to try to connect with other life. And so that was going out that very year, and Roddenberry said, let's do a story about that. What if it comes back in 200 years and it's been altered? And this message of goodwill that we've sent out has been misinterpreted. And now it's coming back with this alien race of robots coming back to destroy Earth because of this gesture that we sent out in the name of peace. And it's really interesting when I was doing this new book is there's, among all the hundreds and hundreds of memos, there's a Roddenberry wrote to NASA saying, can we use Voyager or use the mock-up for Voyager for this movie? And he's explaining to them, now we're not painting NASA in a bad way. You know, we've never done that. We never will do that. But what if this other race gets a hold of it, misunderstands it, and misunderstands the programming and everything else, and it comes back in this way? And NASA writes back and says, are you kidding? We love Star Trek. You can have it, no charge. Come pick it up. Let's insure it and everything, and we're going to send it over there and put it in your movie. And so they went and picked up the prototype mock-up for Voyager, and they took it over to Paramount and filmed Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Now, knowing that, you know, Gary, go watch that movie again, and I think you're going to, now that you're older and wiser too. I think you're going to watch Star Trek: The Motion Picture with different eyes, and you're going to really see it as a very interesting and effective movie on many different levels. But when we were younger and we went and saw this thing, and we were in our late teens and early 20s, and we all went and saw this thing, we had just come off the rush of Star Wars, and we wanted to have a good time at the box office, and it wasn't quite what we had thought it should be.
Well, you know, didn't they have on the original Star Trek, didn't they have one of the episodes where the same thing what we're talking about that was takeoff on the movie, and it was sitting there thinking basically Kurt was its creator, and that the changeling, yeah, and it was a good episode, and I felt that too when I was watching the motion picture. I said, well, wait a minute, I'm having deja vu here. This kind of feels like an episode from the original series. Well, I got to tell you, you know, writing this book, the new book, and going through all the memos and the different drafts of the scripts and everything, if you're just looking at a one-sentence pitch for it, that episode was Nomad, which was a space probe that collided in space with an alien space probe, and Nomad was designed to seek out intelligent life. The alien space probe was designed to exterminate disease and imperfection from some of the planets that were within its system, like biological problems, not people. And these two collided, and their programming became merged, and so now Nomad's coming back, seeking its creator, and when it gets to Earth, it's going to find out that it's imperfect people, and it's going to want to destroy them. So that was the idea behind the Changeling. Star Trek: The Motion Picture is similar to that, and for some people's liking, too similar. But in this one, Voyager goes out, is misinterpreted, and it comes back with a machine planet, with the race from the machine planet, and they have accepted Voyager as a god because it came down on their planet, and they never even thought there was life on other planets. And so now they've built this giant ship for Voyager to be in, and they're sending it back to Earth to find the creator so that they can worship him. In a sense, they're in search of their own god. And but when they find out that God is actually man, these biological units, they're going to freak out. So you can look at these two stories and say there's similarities between them, absolutely. But there's a texture to Star Trek: The Motion Picture that's going into themes about God and things along that nature, which weren't really looked at in that first Star Trek episode. So I think what Gene was doing with that is he was saying, well, we did this episode, and it was a fun little idea. Let's take it to the next level and work in these deeper themes into it. And so We can say he was borrowing from himself, or we can say he was just expanding into a much richer level of storytelling with Star Trek: The Motion Picture. That's how I look at it now. When I was 20, I said, rip off. Now I watch it and I go, no, this is actually much deeper. I like this.
Well, I remember taking my wife. We just got married pretty much when that came out. And I remember being in the theater, the music, it just caught you. I mean, it was just, just brought you right into the movie. Now, I just got a message from your guys' agent saying that she left him a message. So hopefully something didn't happen with Vic.
Well, if not, I will represent Vic, and I will tell you all about Star Trek Continues. But I think we're going to hear from Vic.
Well, I hope so.
I've never known him to miss a show.
Okay. Of all the Star Trek movies, which was your absolutely the favorite, and why?
Well, I would say a lot of people will say Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home because it had a lot of humor in it. And that was certainly an entertaining movie. But I think Wrath of Khan is my favorite. It is just excellent filmmaking from start to finish. It's a great story about revenge. It's basically as classic as Moby Dick, where he's going out there to kill the whale that took his arm. And here we've got Ricardo Montalban Khan, who's going out to kill Kirk because Kirk abandoned him and his people on this planet, thinking he was doing them a favor. You want a world to conquer? Here, I'm going to give you one. There's no people on this planet, and it's a rough planet, but if anybody can do it, you guys can do it. And they said, thank you, we'll go. But the atmosphere changed. It got knocked out of its orbit by a little bit. The atmosphere changed. It became an entirely intolerable place to live, and Khan just spent several years seething and wanting to kill Kirk because he lost his wife and everything else. And so when the Enterprise comes back, it's like, So it's a great story of revenge, which is a classic theme in literature anyway. And the pacing is great. It's a wonderful movie. But next to that, my favorite is the first one, because once you get past the fact that they borrowed from an episode of the original series and built on it, once you get past that, and the fact that it's not fast-paced, it's really, I think, a very deep concept, and it's got a strong central theme. And I remember being in the theater, Andrew. I remember being in there, and when Kirk goes up to V'ger, and it looks like Voyager, but he goes up there and he sees the V and the G and the ER, and there's these blank spaces in between where it's been charred, and he kind of rubs the plate, and it says Voyager. Now, keep in mind, this had just been launched that year, I believe. And so when he rubbed that off, the audience just burst into laughter, not laughing at it, but laughing with it. They were just so delighted. It was such a great movie moment that nobody was expecting. And they were very good about not divulging the ending of the movie when this thing came out. It was very well guarded. And it was just a great movie moment for everybody in that packed theater when he rubbed that thing off.
Oh, I remember that part, yeah. And it had some great actors and actresses in that movie, too, which made it just all the better.
I thought Shatner was great in that movie. He had never looked better. He really trimmed down for that role, and he pulled the acting back. He was very subdued. We all have fun doing our William Shatner impressions, and going over the top a little bit. But, it's funny. You watch those original Star Trek episodes, and in most episodes, he's not that way. In most episodes, it's a pretty subdued performance. It all kind of had to do with who was directing. Some of the directors would say, let's take it down a notch, Bill. Others would say, give me more, and then they would push the camera in, and he doesn't know how close the camera is. The camera's the same distance from him on a long shot as it is a wide shot, but they push in with the lens, and they zoom in, and he doesn't know that it's a tight shot on him. You got to have a director you can trust who can say, we're in real close on you, so you don't need to be too rich right now. Be a little more subtle. But you'll see a lot of episodes of the original Star Trek where he's got great subtlety in his performance. Look at something like the Corbinite Maneuver, if any of your listeners know titles. That's the one with Clint Howard, Bollock, and the giant spaceship that grabs them. And some of these are Mudd's women. I mean, I think Shatner's performance is beautifully underplayed.
Oh, yeah.
And you get that in the motion picture, too, the first motion picture. I think it's a very subtle performance.